Gosh, you family. Happy holidays. Excited to be here with you today. I'm Amy DuVall. I'm a 1995 graduate of the McKelvey Engineering School. I'm a former lobbyist and lawyer, and I now own a small bakery and baking instruction class called From Politics to Pastry, based in Alexandria, Virginia, although we do our classes virtually all across the world. Website is frompoliticstopastry.com, so I encourage you to check that out. I'm super happy to be here with you today to give you some interesting ideas on maybe how to shake up your beverages for the holidays. So some of you may have been aware during COVID, there was kind of a trend on what's called Dalgona coffee, which is a whipped coffee. It actually originated in Korea. The name is based off a sugary sweet that they have in Korea called Dalgona. But what's kind of weird is that Dalgona sweets don't show up in Dalgona coffee. So go figure. But so it's called Dalgona coffee. It's a whipped coffee. I'm going to show you how to make that today. And then I'm going to show you a couple other variations in case you're not a coffee drinker. We're going to go through a matcha whipped drink and almost like a frozen hot cocoa whipped drink. And you've got the option to add different flavors to those two, and I'll walk you through that. So that's what we're going to cover today, and I encourage you to try it out. If you have any questions while you're watching this video, feel free to reach out to me on my website, and I look forward to talking to you. So let's get started. So here's what you're going to need. You're definitely going to want a hand mixer, not a stand mixer, and probably not a handheld whisk like this, because otherwise you're going to be whisking for a very long time. Good arm exercises, but you probably won't like me much afterwards. So definitely encourage you to use a hand mixer, especially for the Dalgona coffee, which takes a little longer to whip than the other two options. So we're going to need that. You're going to want a bowl about this size for the Dalgona coffee and a smaller bowl for the matcha or the hot chocolate. About this size is fine, cereal bowl size, soup bowl kind of idea. We're going to need some granulated sugar. We're going to need some baking cocoa, just unsweetened cocoa if you have it. I'm going to get a little fancy today and use a mix of regular unsweetened cocoa or like Dutch cocoa and what's called black cocoa, which is extremely high cocoa content. It's what's in Oreo cookies. That's why they're such a dark color. Then you're going to need some instant coffee. And when I say instant coffee, I literally mean the stuff that you add hot water to, not ground coffee that you would put in a coffee maker. So this is actually instant coffee crystals. And I'll explain to you why in a second, why you want to make sure it's that. And then if you want it, we need whipping cream for the matcha and for the hot chocolate, heavy whipping cream. If you are lactose intolerant, I would suggest using coconut milk because that's going to be your highest fat content, which is going to allow you to whip it into a frothy cream. Skim milk or almond milk, things are lower in fat, not going to work so well. You're going to be whipping forever and you're never going to get that nice whipped cream consistency. And then we're going to need, if you're making all 3 glasses, you're going to want 3 glasses filled with ice, or about halfway with ice. I've got oat milk then in mine, just because that's what I happen to have on hand. There you can use whatever milk you choose to drink. It's fine to have skim milk, whole milk, whatever you like to drink. We're not actually whipping that up. That's just for the actual drink itself. And if you want to get really fancy, you can use some extracts at some point for the hot cocoa. Instead of just being cold whipped cocoa, you could have orange chocolate cocoa whip. You could have, I've got raspberry. I've also got some peppermint, just to give you some ideas on how you can shake it up a little bit. And then I also have, again, just to be fancy, I've got what's called dark chocolate crunchy pearls. I'll show them in this other camera so you can see. They're just little crunchy chocolate pieces, kind of like a Rice Krispie or a Kit Kat texture, just to sprinkle on the top. Some chocolate sprinkles, some rainbow sprinkles. You can get creative with that when we get to that point. Those are our ingredients, and you're going to need a little bit of hot water as well for the instant coffee. And as far as tools, we've got our mixer, we've got our bowls, and then you're going to need some measuring spoons and a 1/2 cup measure. You can use a solid measure like this, or you could use like a Pyrex measuring cup. That'll work fine as well. I think that's all of our tools. So let's get started. So with the Dalgona coffee, like I mentioned, it's a whipped coffee, but it's with instant coffee. The reason it's instant coffee, and you're going to see how we have to compensate for this in the next two recipes. Instant coffee has stabilizers built into the crystals that allow it to whip without adding heavy whipping cream. Espresso powder or coffee powder does not have that built into it, which is why you want to use, like, I think Sanka is a brand of instant coffee. This is literally just from Whole Foods 365. Doesn't have to be a fancy one. So we're going to use instant coffee. So we're going to start with 2 tablespoons of instant coffee. Now this is for 1 serving, and I'll warn you too, Dalgona coffee is very strong. It is not overly sweet. If you want to make it sweeter, I would suggest using maybe sweetened condensed milk in your serving glass, or adding a little more sugar to what we're about to do. Although you can't get too crazy with the sugar or you're going to screw up the chemistry of the recipe. But just be forewarned, this is definitely going to put some hair on your chest. It's definitely strong. So again, this is just for 1, maybe 2 servings, depending on how much you want to have. You'll see at the end how much it produces. So we've got 2 tablespoons of instant coffee. And then to that, we are going to add 2 tablespoons of hot water. What's kind of cool about Dalgona coffee, and it's been all over the internet over the last few months, is that it's a 1-to-1-to-1 ratio. So it's the same amount of water, instant coffee, and then granulated sugar. I'm going to dry this off so my sugar doesn't stick to my measuring spoon. And then we've got 2 tablespoons of granulated sugar. When I say granulated sugar, I just mean the plain old white sugar that you use for baking. All right, 2 tablespoons of granulated sugar. So believe it or not, that's it. That's all you do from an ingredient standpoint. And at this point, you may be thinking, how the heck is that going to turn into something that looks like whipped cream? But you have to trust me on this one. This is where the beauty of chemistry comes in. So to this, we are now going to take our handy dandy hand mixer. Things are going to get loud here, but I'm going to walk you through how to do this. We're going to whip this for probably close to about 5 minutes. You're going to see the, I'll show you in the camera here, you're going to see the consistency change. It's first going to all come together. It's going to start getting a little frothy. Then it'll get a little frothier, and then it'll kind of start to get closer to the texture of a whipping cream, maybe even close to a pudding, depending on how thick you want it. All right, so let's give it a try. Here's what it looks like when we start. Doesn't look like much. If you want to, you can take a little whisk, or it's teeny tiny whisk. I love this whisk, or a spoon if you want to. We're just going to mix this together. Step isn't necessary. The mixer is going to blend it for you. But if you'd like, you can kind of turn this into just a really essentially instant coffee. Concentrate is what we've got right now, because there's only 2 tablespoons of water in there. All right, and now we're going to start whisking and blending away. By the way, I've got the whisk attachments on my mixer. So the reason we have a larger bowl for the Dalgona coffee is, as you can see in the countertop camera, this splatters everywhere. So you want to err on the side of a larger bowl versus a smaller bowl. You don't have this problem with the next 2 recipes. My mixer goes up to a 7 level. I've got it on a max. We're trying to force air into this liquid, right, to turn it into a whipped cream consistency. Just take some patience. You got to stick with it. You can see in the countertop camera, the color is already changing. It's getting lighter because we're forcing air into it. And the final color is going to be more of a kind of a khaki caramel color. If it helps, you can actually set a timer as well. But you'll be able to see as the consistency changes. also going to see that the level in the bowl is going to start to rise as the volume increases. So we've only been doing this for about a minute, but I'm going to stop and show you in the countertop camera. You can see we've already got some nice bubbles. We've got a much lighter color. It's a thicker liquid, still a liquid, not something that's close to whipped cream, but you can already see that it's starting to change. All right, let's get back to it. Depending on how big your bowl is, you may want to tilt it to the side a little bit to let all the volume kind of accumulate in the bottom. If the bowl is really big, the ingredients may only cover a tiny little bit of the portion of the bowl. So just keep that in mind. Feel free to move the bowl around if you need. All right, so probably about 2 minutes now. And if you can see in the countertop camera here, again, still a liquid, but starting to, as you mix, you can actually see the pattern that the whisks are putting into it. It's holding the pattern for just a little bit. So again, we're only about 2 minutes into it, so you want to keep going, but I just want to show you what it looks like every step of the way. In that countertop camera, how there's little cracks left behind right now by the whisk. And you know it's getting thicker. I grabbed a spatula too for helping me get this out of the bowl when it's done. A spoon will work just fine. All right, we're probably about 3 minutes in. Can you see that the consistency is now much more foamy? The liquid is not, it's not a flowing liquid anymore. Making progress. A few minutes to go. Obviously, if you do this at a lower number speed on your mixer, it's going to take longer. So that's why I just crank it up to the max speed at the beginning. All right, so we're about 4 minutes into it. And if you can see in the countertop camera, we've now got a nice, let me get this closer to the countertop camera here. We've got a nice consistency that's not coming off my spatula too easily. But we're going to keep going. And you can also see that the color is much lighter than it was when we started, significantly lighter. So it's getting close to that khaki caramel color, which is what we want. We might be done before 7 minutes on this one. Might be close to the 5 or 6. All right, so once we get to this point, this is about the 5-minute mark. Now we've got it pretty darn thick. It's not coming off of the spatula. It's really a personal preference at this point, how thick you want it. This would be fine and will definitely work. I'm gonna go 1 minute longer just so you can see the options. All right, I think this is just about as thick as it's gonna get. So I just personally, maybe it's because I'm an engineering school grad, but I find this recipe pretty fascinating because you only have 3 ingredients, very little liquid to begin with, 2 tablespoons of water, and you end up with this super cool, fluffy, almost marshmallow-like texture. I think this is a lot of fun for kids to watch as well. And aside from it being hot water that you're adding, there's really nothing dangerous in this, assuming you've got some parental supervision watching the mixer so the little fingers don't get caught in it. All right, so at this point, like I said, this is technically 1 serving, but it's going to be up to you to decide if maybe it's enough for a couple glasses, given how strong it is. All right, so we've got our glass. You could use chocolate milk if you wanted, but some sort of a milk beverage. My ice has started to melt a little bit, so it looks a little interesting in here, but I've got oat milk and ice, and we are just going to put this right on top. And what's going to happen is that this whipped cream, if you will, this Dalgona coffee is going to slowly start, you can stir it into the glass and it's slowly going to start to incorporate. So it's going to get, it's going to get a little less strong as you mix it with the water and the milk, the ice and the milk. So like I said, this is 2 servings. It's a very generous 2 servings. You could use a bigger glass in this too, of course, if you wanted to. All right, so we've got our Dalgona coffee. We'll make it really pretty here. Kind of get your little dollop on the top here. And then this is where I mentioned you can start to add on some extras. If you have some chocolate sprinkles, this would be a perfect time to use them. I'm going to use the chocolate pearls that I have. If you wanted to put like chocolate covered coffee beans on the top, you could do that. You don't have to put anything. You could put shredded coconut. Sky's the limit. This is where you can get creative. So there's our first drink, the Dalgona whipped coffee. Super strong. I would not suggest drinking this right before you go to bed if you want to fall asleep, but a lot of fun to make and very delicious and probably not like anything you've ever tasted before. So that's the Dalgona coffee. All right, so now we're going to move on to the matcha. Matcha is a very personal choice as to whether you like matcha or not. Lots of people, it seems very split decision. Lots of people either love it or hate it. Depends on the day for me. I find that it tastes sometimes like freshly cut grass, which is a smell that I like, not necessarily a taste. So I will tell you on this recipe, matcha, it's very strong as well and has a very prominent taste. So you may want to play around with the sugar, the amount of sugar in the recipe, give or take a little bit. Again, we can't use too much more than the recipe or the chemistry is going to break apart in the whipped cream. But I can tell you that I've seen it with less sugar than what I'm about to suggest to you because I personally, for my taste, found that it was way too strong. So feel free to play around with the sugar proportions if you like it less sweet or more sweet, okay? So remember I mentioned that Dalgona coffee is made out of, we just saw, out of instant coffee granules. They have a stabilizer built into them that allows them to be whipped and turn them into essentially a whipped cream without adding whipped cream or some other kind of whipping base. We don't have that with matcha or cocoa powder. They don't have those stabilizers built in. So you have a couple options as to how to add that stabilizer. Probably the most easily accessible for people, most people anyways, would be heavy whipping cream. You have a couple of other options. One is, especially if you're vegan, is called aquafaba, which is the liquid that is in a can of chickpeas, for lack of a better explanation. So that actually has some nice thickening powers to it, and you can whip that up and it gets foamy. It's not going to get as foamy as the whipping cream, but like I said, especially if you're vegan, that's a great option for you. And then the other one is egg whites. So egg whites, if you've ever baked with those, you've tried to make a meringue out of egg whites, they also have a natural whipping ability to them for consistency of whipping cream. The reason I'm not using egg whites today is that these are going to be, they would be raw egg whites. We're not going to be baking anything. So while eggs are pasteurized most times, just a little less risk in using the whipped cream. And obviously, if you're vegan, you probably are not using the egg whites to begin with. So those are your three options. You can either whip egg whites exactly the same way I'm going to whip the whipped cream. You could whip aquafaba exactly the way I'm going to whip the whipped cream. The aquafaba may take you longer than either the whipped cream or the egg whites. And if you are going to use egg whites, I would suggest adding a pinch, like 1/8 of a teaspoon, 1/4 of a teaspoon of cream of tartar, which will help the egg whites stay nice and foamy, nice and with peaks, stiff peaks. This is what we're looking for. Okay, so with the matcha, we are going to grab our smaller bowl. And this is matcha powder. I actually don't know if I mentioned this in the ingredients earlier. I might have skipped over that. So matcha powder, it's a Japanese tea, essentially, green tea. And it comes in little packets like this. You don't want to use a matcha tea bag because the consistency is probably not going to be a powder. It's going to be more of a like crushed up tea leaves. You can actually buy matcha powder. So that's what this is going to be. And we are going to add, actually first, real quick, I'm going to clean off the whisks for my mixer. Just rinse them under some hot water so I can use them. All right. So for the whipped matcha, we want to start with 3 tablespoons of sugar. Let me tell you too that the matcha and the hot cocoa or the cold cocoa recipe that we're doing here, the whipped version, are not that 1-to-1-to-1 proportion that we had for the Dalgona coffee. So not quite as easy to remember, but hopefully you can follow along with these still limited number of ingredients. So for the matcha, we are going to do 3 tablespoons of sugar. Now, remember, I had said earlier, I have seen it with 2 tablespoons of sugar. And if you wanted to do 4, maybe even 5 tablespoons of sugar, that will probably still work, kind of up to your taste. I found that 3 is a good happy medium for me. Still tastes like matcha, but still has some sweetness to it. So we're going to do 3 tablespoons of granulated sugar to 1 tablespoon of matcha powder. And this drink, it probably goes without saying, is going to be, if you've ever had matcha before, it's a lovely green shade. So it's kind of fun too. Christmas colors. All right, so there goes our matcha into the bowl. And then we are going to do 1/2 cup of whipping cream. I'm shaking mine, tends to settle sometimes. So, and I got to open this one because it's brand new. All right, so this is a 1/2 cup measure. We're going to do 1/2 cup of whipping cream into the bowl. I'm going to wipe out the measuring spoon so we can use it for the cocoa in a little bit. Matcha flavor is very, very strong. So if you don't clean off your tools and then you go to use something else right away, or use them in something else right away, they'll taste like whatever you're measuring and matcha. It's a very, very powerful taste. All right. So we've got our, just to recap, we have 1 tablespoon of matcha powder, 3 tablespoons of granulated sugar, and 1/2 cup of whipping cream in this bowl. You're going to see this is a lot faster. This is going to take all of 30 seconds, a minute max, as compared to the Dalgona coffee. And we are now going to, I'm going to kind of stir it up a little bit, just with the mixers without turning it on. You don't want that matcha powder to fly away everywhere when you turn this on. Do a quick stir, kind of wet everything. And now we're gonna, unlike the Dalgona coffee where I immediately cranked it up to the max speed on my mixer, we're gonna just go to start at a 1 so our matcha powder doesn't fly everywhere. And then I'm gonna start going to a 2. You're going to be able to smell it right away. If you've never had matcha before, I certainly encourage you to try it. It's a lot of fun to always try new flavors. You're going to see that this is thickening up almost instantaneously because whipping cream is made, it has so much fat in it that it's made to, you know, we're pumping air into the fat molecules and turning it into a nice airy whipped cream. Happens pretty quickly. So I'm on 3, now I'm on 4 level on my mixer. And you can probably see in that countertop camera, we're already getting the track marks, if you will, of the whisks in that mixture. Now, I'm gonna go to a 6, and I'm gonna turn it off to tell you, you don't wanna over whip this. It's hard to over whip Dalgona coffee because there's you don't have a dairy in there to over whip. You may not know this, but if you over whip whipped cream as you're making it, you will end up with butter and buttermilk. That's how butter solids are made, right? They fall to the bottom of the bowl and then the buttermilk is at the top. Essentially, you are whipping the whipped cream so much, putting so much air into it for so long that you force the solids and the liquids to separate. So you definitely can over whip this matcha drink and the cocoa drink that's going to come afterwards. So you don't want to do that. So, I mean, this took all of maybe less than 30 seconds, and I would say we are already where we want to be. You can see that we have a nice, let me get a spatula here. We've got a nice thick consistency that's not going to fall off the spatula. And that took, you know, very little time. All right, so I would give this a stir. So the color is, I don't know if you can see it so well on the camera. It's a kind of a moss green with some flecks in it because that matcha powder doesn't completely dissolve into a moss green color. We've still got some little kind of dark polka dots, if you will. But you do want to make sure that all that sugar is dissolved, if nothing else, right? So I'm going to grab my another glass of cold milk with some ice in it. And we're going to dollop this on the top, just like we did Dalgona coffee. And for this one, again, you can decorate with anything you want on the top, or not decorate at all. You could put a little bit of matcha powder maybe on the top if you wanted. We're gonna use our clean hands and fingers to get it into a nice whipped tea from the top. I'm gonna rinse off my beaters for the cocoa. And then I'm gonna sprinkle a little matcha on the top just for appearance. Don't sprinkle too much matcha on the top because it's very bitter by itself. It's very bitter. Same with the cocoa powder, actually. If you've never tasted straight up cocoa powder, I encourage you to try it as you do these recipes. Kids especially are very surprised by it. They think it's gonna taste like a chocolate bar. And because there's no sugar in it, it's just the cocoa powder, it's very bitter. So you don't want to put too much on the top, just a little tiny bit for decoration. All right, so I'm just going to do a tiny little bit on the top. You could put sprinkles on the top of this one too. I think that would look pretty. And there's our whipped matcha variation, okay? All right, let's move on to our last one. Frozen hot chocolate. There is a restaurant in, I think it's still there, in New York City called Serendipity 3 that is famous for their frozen hot chocolate, which is kind of what this is like. The difference is we're going to make that whipped hot chocolate and we're going to serve it over iced milk. At Serendipity 3, the entire drink is the solid whip, right? Which you could do too if you want. So this is very similar to the matcha recipe, except we're going to use cocoa powder instead. Now, again, because there's no stabilizers in the flat up cocoa powder, we need to add the stabilizer. In this case, I'm going to use whipped cream. But remember, you could use aquafaba, you could use egg whites as well. And if you were going to use those, the egg whites with cream of tartar, you would want to use about the same amount by volume, right? So we still would want to be using about half a cup, give or take, okay? All right, so let's get started. I need my other clean bowl, which is right in front of me. All right, so in this case, we're going to use 2 tablespoons of granulated sugar. Remember what I said with the matcha recipe? I used 3 tablespoons because I felt like it needed a little more sweetness to counterbalance that matcha. You have the same flexibility with this whipped cocoa. If you want more chocolate, less sugar, I would go with the 2 tablespoons. If you want it kind of right down the middle, I'd go with 3 tablespoons. And if you want it really sweet, you could probably push it to 4 tablespoons, okay? So we're gonna start with the 2 tablespoons of granulated sugar. Remember to wipe off your tablespoon measuring from the matcha powder, or you will have matcha hot cocoa. Which could be interesting, but that's not what we're going for today. All right, so we've got 2 tablespoons granulated sugar. Now, what you need is 1 tablespoon of cocoa powder. I mentioned earlier, I'm gonna shake it up a little bit, make it a little fancier. And I'm gonna break up 1 tablespoon is 3 teaspoons. So I'm gonna break this up into 2.5 teaspoons of Dutch processed unsweetened cocoa, baking cocoa essentially, and 1/2 teaspoon of black cocoa, just to give it a little more of an Oreo flavor, if you will. But you can break it up however you want. If you want to use all black cocoa powder, knock yourself out. It's going to be very bitter, so you might want to add some more sugar in that instance. But what we're going for is a total of 1 tablespoon of cocoa powder. So I've got my baking cocoa here, and we are going to add 2.5 teaspoons. 1, 2, and we're gonna do 1/2. That aside. And we're gonna pull out, this is black cocoa. If you've never worked with it before, hopefully you can see it in my countertop camera. It is very, very dark brown. Not quite black, but close. And it smells, it does smell like an Oreo when you open the canister. So we're going to use 1/2 teaspoon of black cocoa. Black cocoa, I normally, if you're looking for it, you may not be able to find it in grocery stores so much. I don't get any sales from them, but I will tell you that King Arthur flour is probably the most universally used brand of cocoa powder and the easiest to find online. I've seen it on Amazon, and then of course they sell it themselves as well on their site. So we've got 1/2 teaspoon, and you can see in that bowl the difference in color between the regular cocoa powder, if you will, and the black cocoa. All right, so we've got a total of 1 tablespoon, 3 teaspoons of cocoa split between the black and the baking cocoa, unsweetened, Dutch processed, that variation on cocoa. And then we are going to add 1/2 cup of whipping cream again, shake it up a little bit. And remember, I mentioned at the beginning that if you wanted to flavor this, you could. So we've got peppermint extract, I've got some raspberry extract, some orange extract. I think I'm gonna go for the raspberry. You don't need to add an extract. In fact, the last time I made this, I just did it straight up. It's gonna taste pretty much like chocolate mousse. So if you wanna flavor it, now's the time. So I would suggest adding, extracts can be pretty strong. So you wanna start small and add more if you need to. So I'm gonna start with 1/4 teaspoon for this amount. I guess it would help if I actually opened the extract bottle. See, even professional bakers, we have moments like this. All right, so we're gonna take the lid off so it actually comes out of the bottle. 1/4 teaspoon of raspberry extract into the bowl. And then if you decide that, you know, that when you go to taste the final product, it doesn't have enough extract, you can always add a little more and whip it one last quick second. All right, and just like we did with the matcha, we're gonna use our beaters to kind of just not completely dissolve the dry into the wet, but just to give it a head start so it doesn't fly everywhere. You could use a spoon for this too. I just figure the minimum amount of dishes to do at the end, the better. So we're just gonna stir it a little bit. And like the matcha, this is not going to take us more than a minute. It might even be closer to 30 seconds here. All right, smell that raspberry. So we're going to start on level 1. I'd upped it to level 2 once I knew that the cocoa powder wasn't going to fly all over the kitchen. Be sure to turn your bowl too, or move your mixer, just to make sure equal opportunity for everything in the bowl. Okay, I'm going to up it to 3. You can already see that it's not quite chocolate mousse consistency, but certainly thicker. And then I'm going to up it to 6. If anybody's counting out there, I don't even think we made 20 seconds yet. And remember, we don't want to overmix this. So I think we are about there. Grab one more spatula. And you guys can see from a consistency standpoint, we've got that. Not going to fall off the spatula. That's what we're looking for. So it's at this point, let me grab a spoon, that you could taste it for your extracts. I personally think I just wanted a hint of raspberry. Again, just always remember extracts can be super strong. A little bit goes a long way, especially with something like peppermint. You don't want it to taste like toothpaste. Toothpaste is good for what it's good for, but you don't want your whipped winter drink to taste like toothpaste. At least I don't. So keep that in mind with the extracts. And then we're going to take our iced milk. We're going to flop this right on the top. You're going to see that it kind of falls into the milk, which is what you want it to do. And then a little bit above the top. This one's melted a little more than the others. So it's not going to have quite as much on the top. It doesn't look quite as pretty. Take my hands off. And again, you can put your sprinkles, your jimmies, if you're from New Jersey, East Coast, that's what my husband calls them, jimmies. And you can add your crunchy pearls on top. If you really want to be decadent, you could add some whipped cream on top of this. And if you're lactose intolerant, that would probably not be good, between the whipping cream and the whipped cream on top. But you can do it. It's your drink. You can personalize it however you want. So let me get this out of the way. And here's the whipped hot chocolate, essentially, whipped cold chocolate. So we've got a little more, my ice has started melting there. So you can probably see, let me see if I can get these here in the countertop camera. It's been at least probably 15 minutes since we did the Dalgona coffee, and you can see how those stabilizers work. It doesn't really look any different than when we put it in the cup a little while ago. We've got our matcha here. Now remember, these two, the ice has started to melt a little bit in my glass, so they look a little more watery. You can drink them straight like this, or I'm going to grab a straw and show you guys. Let's use this one since it's a little more watery right now. You can, I've seen people drink these both straight up like this, so literally straight up like that and get the mustache, which is the best. Or that Dalgona coffee is strong. Again, I'm just warning you guys. It's delicious, but it is strong. Or you can kind of mix it together, like I'm doing with a straw or a spoon here. Make it a little more the whole, instead of, 2 bites. So when you drink it this way, you get the foam and then you get the liquid afterwards. If you mix them together, you're kind of going to get the whole shebang in one sip. So this is the frozen hot chocolate, if you will, with the raspberry. It's personally one of my favorites. And then we've got the matcha. Let's try that one too. I really do think that the 3 tablespoons of sugar is just that perfect, happy middle ground for the matcha. You still get that grassiness of the matcha tea, but you get some sweetness too. So I encourage you guys to try all 3 of these. I hope you have fun making them by yourself or with your family or whoever you might be celebrating the holidays with. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. My website is From Politics to Pastry, and couldn't be happier to do this for WashU. Thanks, everybody. Have a great holiday. Take care.